decades now, the scientific community has been clear about the dangers we're facing and the costs of not taking sufficient climate action, and still, emissions are rising. In this session, we'll bring in experts to talk about some brand new scientific findings on the dangers and the opportunities, but also to discuss how we find ways of implementing this science into the big decisions made by governments and corporations to bring about the change we need. Joining me on stage is Sandrine Dixson-Declève, co-president of the Club of Rome. She also currently chairs the European Commission Expert Group on Economic and Societal Impact of Research and Innovation, and sits on the European Commission's mission on climate change and adaptation. Also on stage with me is Akanksha Khatri. She is the head of the Nature Action Agenda at the World Economic Forum. She is the lead author of the New Nature Economy Reports, a series of reports showing the relevance of nature loss to boardroom discussions on risks and opportunities. Joining me also is Natasha Matic. She is the executive director of the Accountability Accelerator, one of the 5 components of the Global Commons Alliance, which supports radical collaboration among stakeholders in order to build an effective accountability architecture to hold companies and cities accountable for delivering on their nature-positive commitments. Talk about an all-star, powerful panel of women. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, Sandrine, let me start with you. You were with us last year, and we talked to you about the book Earth for All, a survival guide for humanity. So you co-authored that, and it's been published, and now you've just released this new report, SDGs for All, Strategic Scenarios. This report identifies urgent policy actions that we need to do to put the SDGs back on track. Yeah. What are these actions?
So maybe just to take a step back, in the last year since we saw each other, we've been blown away by the reaction of Earth for All, the Survival Guide for Humanity, which had 5 key turnarounds. And in this SDG for All report, we use those 5 key turnarounds moving towards the giant leap. What's been interesting is the Earth for All report has now been translated almost in 10 languages, including in Chinese, in the last year. So there's a real interest in understanding how scientific knowledge and economic knowledge can be translated through system dynamic modeling into some real recommendations. And what we saw in SDG for All is that, unfortunately, most of what we already saw in our previous modeling stands true to scrutiny. We're not going to meet most of our SDGs. We know that we've got a huge implementation gap. But in particular, the most striking is on climate action. So both of our scenarios, the too little too late scenario and the giant leap scenario, demonstrate that we actually will not meet 2 degrees in time. In our giant leap scenario, we start to see that we plateau at 2 degrees in 2070. So this kind of matches the worry that we're seeing from the scientists, from Johan Rockström, that's a co-author of Earth for All, saying, you know, we are out of 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. The science is telling us that it's going to be tough. And now even the social sciences that we've integrated into our system dynamic model are saying the same, which is going to push more inequality, more poverty, less well-being, more social tension, etc.
Very troublesome.
Yes.
We've known this for decades, and yet here we are. But the positive is that we are coming together, we are collaborating, and we're really moving the private sector in the right direction. And that's really what the World Economic Forum is all about. And the World Economic Forum has been cited in this report. So Akanksha, I'm curious to get your thoughts on it.
Sure. And it's true. I mean, the World Economic Forum often is seen as the gateway to and the representative of the private sector. But we also are an international organization for both public and private collaboration. And I think we are now at that stage where nature and climate is no longer an environmental issue alone. It is actually an economic issue. So if you look at the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, climate change, extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, they are all cited in the top 5 risks that more than 80% of the business audience is concerned about. So doing right by environmental issues, doing right by climate and nature goals is actually good for the economy and for business.
That's exactly right. And if we, that's the message we need to get out there. And that's what we are doing through We Don't Have Time. Those of you that are tuning in will be familiar with our guests. And Natasha, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you.
And you're really ensuring that private sector is held accountable. That's the whole point of the Accountability Accelerator. Talk to us about why this is so critical. Why does private sector need to be held accountable?
Well, without accountability, there is no action. So it is important to work together with all the different stakeholders to create accountability architecture and create a web of accountability actors globally that will be able to push for this action. And when we work with accountability at the Global Commons Alliance, we approach it as an ecosystem. So it includes both carrots and sticks, and we think that the more we can focus on carrots, which includes everything from incentives and capacity building and resources and guides for companies, we will hopefully end with less greenwashing and less need for sticks. I mean, it's never going to be perfect, but the hope is that it's going to be a little bit better. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to coordinate all the different stakeholders, orchestrate them, find out where are the gaps and opportunities, and then unleash the third parties working in the global south and the global north to start holding companies accountable and supporting them in their action. There is no really excuse anymore for no action.
Right.
We have frameworks, we have standards now, whether it's climate, even in nature, TNFD, SBTN, they're all out there, and there are hundreds of organizations, thousands of organizations globally working on this. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to orchestrate them, coordinate them, and give them resources to be able to start working.
Absolutely, and we have broadcasts like this to be able to share exactly what those standards are, and we have convenings. We have the World Economic Forum bringing together public and private, and to Davos, and so that I think is also why that affiliation is there between the private sector and the World Economic Forum being that representative, because so many companies show up to this. So talk to us a little bit about Davos, the gathering that's upcoming, and how these convenings are able to keep private sector accountable.
Sure. And I think this year is going to be quite unique because we will have the Climate COP in UAE end of November, early December, and the Davos gathering, which will happen in January. So the time between coming together and seeing the global stocktake, as well as what governments actually end up with in Dubai, and what is then the implication for the real economy in Davos would be interesting to see. The climate and the nature agenda will continue to be as strong in Davos as it has been in the last few years. Just to give an example, in 2023 in Davos, a third of the programming was focused on climate, on nature issues, and we see that getting stronger and stronger. Just to give a little bit of a flavor for what could come up in January of 2024, there are 2 or 3 pieces that we want to put on the agenda. One is really thinking about how do we value natural capital. I think we have, over the past, say, 60 years or 70 years, had significant economic growth, which has allowed us to therefore look at better results on health indicators, quality of life, mortality, etc. But all of that growth and development, sadly, has come at the expense of the natural capital. So can we shift to a new paradigm where natural capital is given the same amount of importance, whether be it on countries' GDP assessment or corporate balance sheet? So the natural capital sits along with financial, physical or machinery or other capital, and human capital. So I think those would be one of the pieces. And then the second is understanding that we are talking about a complete shift for the economy. It's not going to happen overnight. I think Natasha here knows it very well. We are kind of locked into a system today which is very extractive. If we have to move to a regenerative system, it requires a complete overhaul. So what is the role for different sectors? What is the role for different stakeholder groups? So I hope that with some of you or all of you, we will be able to take these discussions forward.
That's fantastic. I know you have some comments on this, Sandrine, please.
I'm just wanting to get in here because I so agree. And I think the beauty of what we're seeing through the risk report, and the analysis that WEF is doing around the fact that it's really the social and the environmental risks that are now here is the fact that we need a paradigm shift in our economies. What we've been saying at the Club of Rome since the last 50 years is we have to shift from an extractive model into a model of well-being economics. And I think what's really important, though, is that we need to figure out how we can join the dots between what happens at UAE, what happens at Davos, what happens at the biodiversity COP. These are all the same countries, and they're all negotiating in totally different ways. We need to start with making sure that at COP we have a declaration on the full phase out of fossil energy. Because if we continue to burn fossil energy, we will not meet our goals. Right. And we're already way over the goals in any case. We then need to join the dots on the importance of carbon sinks, on protecting nature, on ensuring that we don't continue to cut down any more forests. But then we need to join the human dots. And the human dimension is all about how do we create an economy of well-being that not only talks about just a just transition, but a transformational transition that brings people on the journey. And that's talking about reducing inequalities. It's about actually paying your fair share. The 10% wealthiest have access to 60 to 80% of our economies. That needs to shift to 40%. Last very important statistic. I mean, CEO salaries today have grown by 1,400% since 1978. 1,400%. And we know that most people are getting poorer and that actually the wealth distribution is getting worse than it's ever been. So how do we join the dots? And we can do it if we bring the right sectors together, if we bring the right governments together and citizens to have the conversations. This is the only way we're going to get out of the mess that we've created.
Sandrine, I could really listen to you talk all day. I mean, it's incredible, the wealth of knowledge you have and how you're able to communicate it and the call to action. And that's what I would love for each of you to share with our audience that's tuning in. Are we going to be able to overcome this? And what is it that people can do to contribute to it? Let me start with you, Natasha.
Well, I think building on what Sandrine said, it's radical collaboration on all levels. You know, it's systemic change, systemic approach to problems, and radical collaboration to make these systems change. So we have to connect the global south with the global north, local with global, and we have to make sure that we're moving all the parts of the system, whether it's government, whether it's corporate sector, NGOs, they all need to be working together. Now we have these silos where, you know, NGOs are enemies of corporations and the other way around, and that has to stop. In order for us to really get to where we need to be, we need to change our approach to collaboration. And I think having now worked in the nature space quite a lot, I'm seeing a different approach, and Akanksha and I are working very closely. Every organization is very much aligned with the other one. We're constantly checking in with each other how things are progressing. We're partnering where it makes sense to partner, or just keeping each other informed. And I think that makes a huge difference. It maybe takes a little bit more time, but we're having more impact and making things happen much faster than in the climate space, you know. And we're also an advantage in the nature space because we're learning from what happened in climate and what worked and what didn't. So I think the message for me is continuing this coordination and close collaboration and pushing systems change on all levels.
I love it. Radical collaboration. You're all making my job so easy. I mean, Akanksha, please jump in. I know you have some thoughts.
Oh, sure. So I think maybe I'll pick up on Natasha's radical collaboration to a little bit of radical vulnerability. One of the things that truly worries me, to your question, is whether we'll be able to make change happen. I think eventually, yes. The question is, how equitable will that transition be? So if we just talk about, even in just, say, the last 20 or 30 years, resource extraction has absolutely tripled. However, 840 million people in the world do not have access to electricity. So we will, I think I have faith, and I think COVID has shown us that we are capable of radical change. So I have faith that we will pivot. The question is, when we do pivot, will it be too late for certain ecosystems, certain populations, and how equitable will the things be? But again, not to leave everybody with like a doom and gloom, but just saying that how do we make sure that the conversations we are having are not too simplistic? We are able to sit with the complexity and bring out the nuances of what needs to be done. Looking at it that, yes, we are each one of us a small cog or a small part of a larger system, but unless and until the entire system pivots, entire system starts to look at valuing nature, valuing climate-related issues, it's not going to happen.
Sandrine, how do you think about this at the Club of Rome? How do we usher in a future that is truly equitable?
So I fully agree. I think it's a question of coming back to what's most essential in all of our lives. A lot of people say to me two things. One is, but hold on, the current economy has brought more people out of poverty. And actually, that's false. The second thing they say is transformation is tough. And that's false too, because actually we've seen through COVID, exactly as you've just said, that we were able to transform. We all had to wear masks. We all got vaccinated. Some didn't want to. But at the end of the day, our governments took power, not in an authoritarian way, but in an authoritative way, a leadership way, saying we are going to protect all of our citizens, not just a few. For me, that was the aha moment. And I'd hoped that we would have translated that, both that sense of urgency and also the important role of the state as a leadership role, not as an authoritarian role, back into we can do this now. Let's apply this to the climate crisis. Let's apply this to the poly crisis. Because if we have more public funds, if we transform, for example, our subsidies to energy, fossil energy, our subsidies to industrial agriculture, and we bring all that together and we create the just transition funds that we need, we have trillions already just there.
Right.
We get rid of the perversities in our markets, we've got trillions right there. We take away just the primacy of shareholder value and we come back to valuing people within the economy and nature. We already are shifting the system. Those are short-term, immediate levers to transformational change towards the long-term systems that we need. We can do it. No pain, no gain, though. There will be some victims.
Wow, it's just mic drops after mic drops. Okay. I love that. So let's come back to the role of the private sector. Natasha, how are we going to move companies along? What are you seeing? The trend is going in the right direction. Are we doing it fast enough?
No, we're not doing it fast enough. And one of the reasons we're not doing it fast enough is that we don't have enough resources. So we need, let's say, philanthropic community. We need governments to put in more resources in what we're trying to do to be able to push change to a much faster degree. Because right now, it's going to take us 50 years to get where we want to, and we only have 10.
We don't have time.
Exactly, we don't have time. So I think more resources are absolutely needed, and that's where all hands on deck are important. We need to engage everybody. Corporations are key actor in the accountability space. You know, we need to, first of all, we need to provide them with support that they need, whether it's guidance, whether it's frameworks, whether it's capacity building. Not all the corporates are bad actors. You know, many corporations don't have the resources or the know-how. I was just talking yesterday with one of the heads of sustainability at a big company, and she was saying, the first thing I did was hire a nature specialist, or somebody who can tell us what we need to do and where we need to get to. So a lot of them need support, and I think we need to engage them in this process and see what they need and provide that. And that way we can bring them in and have them be part of the accountability process and not be scared of the process. Because a lot of the accountability work is a huge value add for companies.
Right.
And if they start embracing it as a value add, then we can get much further than if it's constantly sticks and us chasing them. Because it's too late. When we start looking what they should have done, it's already 3-5 years down the road. So that's already too late. That's why I'm always focusing even more on carrots, incentives and carrots that we can provide so that we can bring them in much faster.
That's a great transition to a question for Kangsha now, because WEF is providing these carrots. How is WEF supporting companies in this transition to clean energy?
So I really appreciated what Natasha was saying, because there is almost a complementary dance between the voluntary and the mandatory markets. So with the voluntary, you can have leadership with some of the front-runner companies, but to change the entire system. So again, go back to if 20% of the companies are willing to do this on a voluntary basis, you still need that 80%, particularly the small and medium enterprises, everyone to be part of this transition. And this can only happen if you have the regulatory or the mandatory requirements coming through. In terms of some of the initiatives and the work that we've been doing, I will just name maybe two. One is actually been done in close collaboration with USAID and Secretary Kerry, is the First Movers Coalition. Is when you are talking about the decarbonization of some of the hard-to-abate sectors like aluminum, steel, aviation, how can we give a purchase agreement signal that if the technologies are ready 10 years from now, corporates will buy it at a certain price point. And once you have that market signal that we don't have to stick to just an extractive model, but we can actually go to a net zero model, and the corporates will actually pay for it, I think that's where a positive market force can provide change. A second piece that, if I may just put it on the table, is also looking about how nature gets integrated into all corporate decision making, both from the point of risk assessment and disclosure, so working closely with frameworks such as TNFD, science-based targets for nature, but then pivoting hopefully also to greater opportunities, whether it be in alternative protein, regenerative agriculture, or sustainable forestry. So I just think we need more of that, but yeah, together we can, as somebody said in this country.
Oh, I love that quote. We were all together, I believe, at WEF in Davos when the science-based targets were announced, and it was just palpable. There was so much excitement. And it's more urgent than ever that we see companies truly commit and to their pledges and to follow through. So how are you viewing this? How are you thinking? How have you seen what companies have done since Davos? As we look ahead to COP28, what are you hoping to see the private sector announce at the highest kind of level?
So it's interesting. I'm seeing a bit of a dichotomy. On the one hand, there's also this unbelievable excitement around the science-based targets, and we really are seeing some big corporate movers who are doing the right thing. And on the other hand, we've seen the greatest windfall profits ever of the fossil fuel energy companies on the back of energy poverty. We've seen the extractive companies going full force and continuing to extract. So this kind of dichotomy between real movement in some real big corporations who are really declaring that they're going to shift their value chains, they're going to fully decarbonize, they're going to integrate science-based targets. And then on the other hand, some of the big, powerful players that are part of the extractive economy that are just holding on with dear life. That was what I was saying about no pain, no gain. There will be some victims. And they're noticing it. And it's getting tough. And what I'm also noticing is that the pressure they're putting then on the politics is scaring the hell out of me. Because what we're seeing here in this country is the continued push towards Trumpism. We saw the first Republican debate, where we had total denial across all of them of the fact that climate change exists. We're seeing populism growing at the European level, and we have the largest European elections ever coming up, actually in June. So the preparation for both of these elections transatlantically, which are going to have a huge impact. And we're seeing on both sides that industrial agriculture, so big ag, big fossil energy interests, gas interests, are really holding on and really starting to use tactics of fear-mongering to scare citizens, that this vision of the world, these alternative futures that we're trying to show of a beautiful, well-being economy where we actually have people working on it. Right now, we've got 5 economies across the globe. We've got donut economics that's permeating at the local level everywhere. We actually have the SG of the UN, Guterres, who's very much calling for moving beyond growth, who's calling for a planetary emergency and knows we need an economic shift. And we presented our SDG for All report to him and to his staff and also to the senior management team last week. Huge excitement about what we can do. And on the other hand, we've got these people that are digging in their heels, saying, no way, not on my turf, not on my time. We need to get more strategic. We need to get tougher. We need to hold them accountable. And we need to work together with those in WEF and elsewhere who are really doing the right thing. And we need them to stand up to the plate and bring their colleagues along and their peers and say, time's up. We don't have time.
I want to give you my role.
You know how much I love this program, and I love all of you. So,
So, Natasha, we're coming up to COP28 is next. We will all find ourselves there. What are you hoping to see, especially from the private sector, in terms of commitments to the pledges they've been making?
Well, I just don't want to see talk anymore. I don't want pledges. I don't want, Akanksha and I were talking about this just earlier today. Action. Tell me what you're going to do in the next year. Tell me that you're signing up for science-based targets. Tell me that you're signing up for TNFD. Tell me that you're signing up for TCFD. You know, there are frameworks right now that are out there that they can actually start putting in action. So that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping, and more importantly, I'm hoping that governments are really going to step up and push in this direction, because without them, even the corporations can only get to a certain level, but governments are really key in this. And so I'm hoping that, you know, that UAE will surprise us with some announcements, hopefully, but really just action plans on all levels. Yes.
And I know Akanksha has, what can you tease us with? What can we look forward to COP28 from the World Economic Forum? What can we look forward to for Davos as well?
So I'll just pick up and build on what she said is, again, we don't have time. We are in 2023. Many of our targets have a deadline of 2030. From a food system point of view, that's 7 harvests left. I don't know how many of us are ready to tomorrow harvest differently, sow differently, and work with the farmer community differently. So I think there's a sense of urgency that we need to adopt today. Again, the corporate reality, many of the procurement cycles, contracts, they are signed 3 to 5 years in advance. So the decisions we take today will not reap benefits or results today. It will only be in 2030. So we just literally have no time to lose. And then the second thing is the media's role is extremely critical. And that's why shows like these are very important, because doing right for climate and nature does not mean that we will not have economic growth and jobs. And somehow there's this dichotomy that has been created that if you do right on net zero, nature positive, equitable economy, there might be a loss of jobs. Like our own research shows that if you pivot towards a nature positive economy, we could be creating 395 million jobs. So I think when we are talking about the rise of populism, we are talking about the right of a bit of fear mongering, we need to combat it with facts that this is the only way. I mean, a resilient future is the one which will give jobs, but it's also the one that works with nature and not against nature.
You know, thank you for saying that, because our audience tuning in from all around the world, they're looking to you for signals. And that is the kind of message that if we are able to say consistently from credible leaders like yourselves, we will see a shift. We'll see a shift in mindset. That's the behavioral scientist in me too. The communication leading to behavioral outcomes. We just have a couple minutes left. So I would love to get from each of you genuine, and you are the most authentic self. I know you're your most authentic self. So give us a true answer. Are we going to succeed? Are we going to be able to overcome this climate crisis? Let me start with you, Sandrine.
I mean, I fluctuate between absolute worry and panic and hope. So I'm in the middle. I do believe that we can succeed if we tap into our best selves as human beings, realize that it's not just about us, it's about the we, not about the me, it's about the eco, not about the ego. If we're able to actually tap into that and become human again and be part of a species, then yes, I think we can do it. We've been through wars, we've come out of apartheid, we've come out of slavery, we've come out of so many despicable parts of our history. As human beings, we don't just need to be intelligent, as Jane Goodall calls us. We can actually be wise. So we need to tap into that wisdom. But I do think we need to bring people on the journey. And we need to make them realize that they can also be their best selves. That this is not about them surviving, it's about them thriving. And we can make all of us thrive equally if we potentially, some of us sacrifice a bit, but it won't be a huge sacrifice, because instability, insecurity will be the greatest sacrifice and demise of our entire human race. So I think that's most important. Let's remember, we can survive and we can thrive, but we've got to do it now.
Perfect.
It's difficult to top that one, so I'm going to keep it very simple. Truly, I believe we are already on the change. And I think the people who are not, I think the train's already started to leave the station. Either you're on it or you're getting left behind. So I truly believe that we are on the way where the economic paradigm is shifting. It's just, again, going to my previous point, will it shift fast enough so that the transition is equitable and we take everybody along, or will it come at the expense of a few people? I think that's what remains to be seen, but I definitely have hope.
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic, as my colleagues are, and I really think equity is the key part here. If we're able to transform our economic system to include everybody and not leave anybody behind, I think we will succeed. But I do think that we'll have some ups and downs in the process. I don't think this is going to be just an easy transition. It will be painful.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Truly, what
Thank you.
great energy. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for answering that question honestly. There's a lot of work to still be done, but we're going in the right direction. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
What a fantastic panel. I am now going to hand it back over to Nick for a deep dive into how digitalization can enable and expedite the green energy transformation.
Okay.